Hi everyone, I hope you are having great days and that you are making solid progress with Project 2. You should be working on that by now. You've started it, you're in the middle of it, you're almost done with it, somewhere along that spectrum. So I put together a nice little video that can maybe help a little bit with this project, because I know it's a slightly daunting task, this idea of analyzing visual rhetoric. And just a quick reminder, I'm your section's writing mentor, and my name is Samantha Fessler. All right, so this little presentation, this little video is about analyzing visual rhetoric. So first, let's just review real quick what rhetoric is. So if you looked at the blackboard, you would have seen that rhetoric is the study of the means of persuasion available or used in a given communication situation. To simplify that a little bit, we can also say, these are my words, that rhetoric is how people try to persuade each other through speech, writing, visual images, etc. So Aristotle, long dead from Greek times, he is the one who looked at rhetoric and went, hey, this is actually kind of useful, and let's break it down so that we can teach it. And so the three things that he decided were necessary for rhetoric were logos, pathos, and ethos. I know you guys know about them. I've seen you mentioning them in your discussion posts, so that's really great. We're just going to review them really quick. So logos, as you can see, it's rational, reasonable, logical. This is appealing to your audience's common sense, to their critical thinking, to their logic. Next, we have pathos. So this is the emotional appeal. This is making them think of happiness or sadness or anger. It's appealing to the way they feel as opposed to how they think. And then the last one, which is sometimes the trickiest, is ethos, which is how the audience perceives you, the rhetorician. And so ethos has to do with, is the author credible? Are they an authority on the subject? Do they know what they're talking about, and can you tell that they know what they're talking about? Is there something that they're saying or doing that makes it obvious to the audience that they've done their research and they know the subject? That's ethos. So how can we use the rhetorical appeals for part 1 of Project 2? What's the best way to use those? So just as a review, make sure we're all on the same page. Project 2 is all about analyzing visual rhetoric, which we're doing through looking at advertisements, right? And part 1 is finding an ad in your community and writing a critical analysis paper about how that ad was put together and what rhetorical aspects are built into it to communicate to its audience. And then the second part is all about choosing a topic yourself and creating your own visual advertisement or banner, what have you, to communicate to the audience. So in the first one, you're analyzing someone else's work. In part 2, you're creating your own work. So we're going to talk about part 1, the best way to analyze somebody else's work. So I just pulled an ad from the internet, one that is reasonably straightforward looking, and I'm going to go over how I would analyze this and approach it to put together for a paper so that I am analyzing it in the most critical way possible and really providing a lot of depth and scope to that paper instead of just touching on some basic key points. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to look at aspects of the ad based on where my eye is drawn first, and then where it's drawn second, and where it's drawn third. So what catches my attention right away about the ad? What's the next thing that catches my attention after I've observed that first thing? And obviously this can be a little bit tricky to figure out because you're taking the whole ad in and you're moving from thing to thing to thing very quickly in your head. So you have to kind of try and slow that down a little bit to figure out what parts are catching your attention first, second, last, etc. So in this particular ad, the first thing that catches my attention is the shadow of this gun here. And why wouldn't it? How often do we see guns? They're in movies a lot and everything else, but it's kind of this really evocative image because guns have to do with like death and violence, right? And so it grabs your attention to see this image of a gun. And then the second thing that draws my attention is this hand. And these two, I move from one to the next very quickly in my mind. And what starts to happen is you make this connection between the shadow of the gun and the hand. Now, the gun itself, we would say that if we look at just the shadow of the gun, that's probably appealing to pathos, right? To emotions. People get emotional. Sorry about that. People get emotional about guns. The second thing that we're noticing here is the hand. Plenty of us know that you can make a gun out of your hand, a little fake toy gun or whatever, right? And so the way the hand is holding the cigarette is the same way that you would hold your hand to pretend that you had a gun. And so what we're seeing is this hand that's holding a cigarette is casting a shadow that looks like a gun, which gives you this impression that cigarettes and smoking right here are dangerous in the same way that guns are dangerous, right? And we can see this connection in the shape of his hand. We can see it because this right here, how his fingers are curled in, look just like these fingers on the handle of the gun. These fingers and the cigarette look like the barrel of the gun, So it's very evocative of this gun image that we've got going on. And then what you also notice is that we've got this smoke coming out of the cigarette. And if you look up over here, you can kind of see what looks like smoke coming out of the barrel of the gun also. And so that gives you the impression that this cigarette smoke is similar to the smoke coming out of a gun right after it's been shot. And so you've just killed someone through smoking, or hurt them, what have you. So those are some of the first things that you notice, the first connections that I notice and that I make. And so that gun, that appeals to your emotions. This shape of a hand, that brings back, maybe it brings back childhood memories of when you used to play cops and robbers or something. It kind of does for me. And so there's a lot of emotional appeal. There's a lot of pathos going on in this image of the gun and the hand holding the cigarette. So after the gun and the hand, the next thing that I notice is this right here, smoking kills. So if we look at that, this is appealing to two parts for me. To me, this is speaking to my critical thinking, to my common sense and logic, as well as to my emotions. Notice they use the word kills. They're not using the word, let me see if I can actually draw right. They're using the word kills. They're not using dies or death. They're saying it kills. This is a lot more active and a lot more violent. So this is how it's emotional, right? Using that word choice is very emotional. And the way that this is more logical is because this smoking kills. This ad is new enough. Everybody knows that smoking kills. This is more of a reminder almost that smoking kills. And it makes you think about everything that you know critically about how smoking kills, why it kills. Obviously there's things like lung cancer and it's bad for your heart, and the list just goes on and on of these really negative effects of smoking that can kill you. So that phrase right there, that little tagline that draws your attention, it's talking to your emotion and your logic. So the next thing that I move to after looking at that smoking kills is this right here. A nice little statistic, right? So this statistic, it could appeal to your emotion because you could be sad that 106,000 people in the UK die every year. More likely, I found that personally did not appeal to emotion so much as to logic and to credibility of the author. It speaks to the credibility of the author because this fact, this statistic, this data, sorry about that, guys. So we're seeing that this many people in the UK die every year because of smoking. That tells you that the person who created this ad has done their research, right? You trust that person because if they're able to tell you a statistic like this, then they know what they're talking about. It also applies to logic, again, because you're seeing our logical sides like numbers, they like statistics, they like facts, they like things that make sense. And so this whole statement going on right here is very factual. It's very statistical, it's data-driven, it's very logical, right? Obviously so. So that phrase pulls both. Now that I've beaten that horse to death and a little bit past, let's move on past that. So those are the first few obvious ones, right? The image going on right here, the smoking kills, and this nice little statistic. Those are the first immediate things that I would talk about in my paper, analyzing each of those. However, I can keep going beyond that very easily. So I could talk next. Here, it's less obvious where to go next. It's hard to say what draws my attention. I could talk about the font that they're using. I could be talking about these background colors. I could be talking about how the hand looks. And so I will talk about each of these just to give you an idea of some different things to think about when you're looking at your own ad. But for me, at least, the order becomes less important because which one of these things I'm noticing might or might not change. So let's talk first about the font, because that seems to segue, right? We were talking about the words, the statistic, what the hell meant. Let's move on to the font that they're using, because font is important, and the color of the text. So black, that's very typical, normal, straightforward. It's no nonsense, right? And if you look at this font is also a no-nonsense font. There aren't any frills, there aren't any curves. This part is bolded, and it's larger font size, right, to really make it stand out and grab your attention. And then here, we have the same font. We usually want consistency, right? They don't want you to get confused, which is why we're using the same font. And again, this font isn't fancy. It's very practical. It's very to the point because that's how they want you to think of this issue. They don't want you to think that they're being dramatic or that they're going overboard with it. They don't want you to think it's a joke or a laughing matter. It's serious. What we also see them doing with the font and the font size is they really want this number that they've used to pop, which is why you see that this and this, the numbers are probably 2 or 3 font sizes bigger than the words in the sentence. And that's, again, that's to make this really pop out to you. So we've talked about font, we've talked about font size, how we can use bold, how they used bold to catch our attention. So the next thing I want to look at is this background. So this background includes all of this kind of white gray color, as well as this black over here, this darker gray over here, and the way that like it fades between those. So first, let's just look at the color schemes that they're using. They're not using a pink or a purple or rainbow colors, nothing bright. It's all blacks and grays. And if you have maybe read any of the articles about it before or whatever, there is a science behind how colors affect what we think of things and emotions and drives. So obviously that's a little bit of extra research you could do, is looking at the colors used and finding those articles that are going to tell you what those particular colors tend to influence in people. Without pulling all of that up, I can say that they're sticking with black, white, and gray in this background. And the reason why seems fairly straightforward. Black, white, and gray are very stark, they're very simple, and they're very sober. Again, it tells you that this is a very serious matter. This isn't something to be happy about. This isn't something to make light of. This is something that we should really consider carefully. Now, as I look at it, the reason that it's fading off like this, and why we have these curved lines going on at the edge of the screen, is because there's kind of this portrayal going on that there's a spotlight on the hand. And so this spotlight is to draw your attention to the hand and the cigarette. And not only is the spotlight there to draw attention to the hand and cigarette, the spotlight is there so that a shadow can be created, showing the gun. Without the spotlight and the shadow, we would never see the comparison between cigarettes and guns. And you have to keep in mind the target audience. This is targeted to the UK. The UK is not the same as here. Their gun laws are very different, and basically nobody has a gun over there. So a gun is probably, I can't say for sure, but a gun is probably going to be even more evocative for them than it is for viewers in the US. So we have this spotlight that creates the shadow, and that's why we have this darkness going on over here, is because it's this area that the spotlight isn't hitting. It's this unknown stuff, which can make you nervous about what else is out there. So as you can see, a lot of the background stuff has to do more with emotion, right? It's about making you feel a certain way, which a lot of ads are, because you're only seeing them for a few seconds. So they're trying to grab your attention very quickly, and it's easier to grab people's emotional attention than it is to grab their logical attention when you've only got a short period of time. So the last thing I want to look at here is the hand itself. If you look at this hand, it doesn't look like a photograph necessarily. It almost looks more like a painting than a photograph. But look at how real this hand looks, okay? If you notice, there's hair right down here on his forearm, right? That's probably a clue that this is probably a guy's hand. You see dirt under the fingernails right there. And so these are all like things that provide more of a realness to it, that brings it closer to home, right? It's not just some pretty model's hand. This is the hand of somebody that the average middle-class person probably knows. What we also see, which I think is really interesting, is if we look at the fingers that are holding the cigarette, they actually look dirtier than the rest of the hand. And I think this is to really kind of give the impression that they're getting, logically speaking, we could say that they're dirty from all the work he does, or maybe they're dirty from all of the ash from the cigarette and everything else. But it's this idea that these fingers right here that are responsible for holding this cigarette are now dirty just by association with it. And nobody likes the idea of being dirty by association, or dirty in general. So these are aspects that we can think about. They purposely chose to make it a very realistic looking hand because that makes it more relatable than a drawing. You look at that hand and you think it could be the hand of your mother or your father, your brother, your next door neighbor. And so it's a lot more relatable and it grabs your attention more than it would if it was a cartoon hand. And then obviously within that, we can potentially look at these fingers, right? And say, these fingers are dirty. And so these are all elements that you can start to look at and really dig into in your advertisement as you're critically analyzing the choices they made. Because if you think that that the person who created this ad, if you think they didn't think about all of these aspects very carefully, you're very wrong. They spent a lot of time focusing on all of these different little things so that it would come together into this whole that would grab your attention very quickly and provide a strong message that you would pay attention to. And so these are the kinds of choices that are made, and these are the types of things we want to be analyzing. So that is how I would go about looking through an ad. I wouldn't necessarily just focus on, say, logos and look for things in the ad that represent logos. Instead, I would move my way through the ad and analyze what I'm seeing and why they made the choices that they made as you go through it. So that's the end of this little video. Good luck on your project. Remember that you are more than welcome to email me with any questions, concerns, any help that you need. Just, type me a quick email and I will get back to you pretty quickly. I usually am pretty close to my email. And I'm always happy to help. And don't forget to check out the writing workshops. That allows you to actually talk to me like I'm talking to you now, and we can get a lot more progress with your project a lot more quickly in ways to help you get the best grade you can get. All right, good luck, everyone.